Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. It's time for wide receivers at a fantasy football crossroads. So, again, we've done this for running backs and quarterbacks. Players can be at a crossroads for a number of different reasons. Some of them would have to do with the player, some of them have to do with outside factors that they maybe can control or can't control. But it all adds up to players that you're going to have to do a lot of digging and a lot of thinking as far as if you're on the clock and you're in the market for this player, is it someone you want to pull the trigger on? And we'll jump right into it with Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets, who is a great example of a player who could be at a fantasy crossroads, but it really has nothing to do with the player themselves. I think the world of Garrett Wilson. I actually think that there's potential in there for Garrett Wilson to be one of the top 4 or 5 receivers in the league in the right situation. I don't know if that situation is with the New York Jets, however, and that is why we find Garrett Wilson on this list. He has broken 1,000 yards in every season he's played in the NFL so far, which is 3. He has eclipsed 1,100 yards twice. And last year, he finally kind of put it all together with a full season with Aaron Rodgers. 1,100 yards, 7 touchdowns, 101 receptions. First time he broke triple-digit receptions, which is also a nice milestone. The problem is this going to continue for Garrett Wilson with Justin Fields at the helm, who is a quarterback that we talk about a lot in fantasy because he's one of those quarterbacks where if you're in one of those antiquated 4-point passing TD leagues, he's kind of a cheat code because 4-point passing leagues just shouldn't exist anymore, but that's another video. However, this is a quarterback that he is not a guarantee to even throw for 200 yards in any given game. 150 to 200 is about his average as far as the yardage he throws for lately, and I don't see that getting much better. The good thing is the Jets do have a nice offensive line and a nice run game. Not much else in terms of passing options, so Garrett Wilson is going to have targets funneled to him, but on the other hand, this is a quarterback that tries his best not to make too many mistakes, plays pretty reserved when it comes to the passing game, in my opinion. Garrett Wilson is kind of in a similar position as George Pickens last year, who had Justin Fields for 5 games. And it can be tough sledding when you have a quarterback that can't spin the ball like a lot of these other top elite quarterbacks can. And I think that's the uphill battle that Garrett Wilson is going to face. Also, I suspect this team is going to run the ball like crazy with a running quarterback and, like I said, a good offensive line and a good run game in place. So they're going to have to pass the ball some. We don't want to overblow this too much as far as, well, they're a passing team or they're a running team. Both teams are going to have to mix in their best players and move the ball in different ways. So we don't want to totally write off someone in an offense that's primarily a rushing attack because they're going to have to pass the ball too. Garrett Wilson's going to get his. It's just a question of, are we looking at another 1,000-yard season with 3 or 4 touchdowns, or are we looking at 1,100 plus yards, 7 plus touchdowns? I think that's going to be very hard for Garrett Wilson to achieve while Justin Fields is the starting quarterback. Unfortunately, he's only had one really nice quarterback option in his career so far, and that was 1 year with Rodgers, who, let's face it, is in the twilight of his career as well. So Garrett Wilson has a lot of things working against him. We know the talent, and therefore we know that he's going to put up a respectable wide receiver 2 season at the very worst. However, the ceiling seems capped, especially with all the factors around him, namely the starting quarterback. Next up on our list is someone that I never thought would be in a position like this, but Tyreek Hill is someone that we have to talk about in terms of, are we prepared to draft this player where they're typically being ranked? If you can believe this, Tyreek Hill is currently ranked 30th overall on Fantasy Pros and wide receiver 14. This is in half PPR leagues, just to give us an idea. So I would argue that a lot of Tyreek's downside is baked into his price this year. You can get him mid to late 3rd round, potentially. I don't think that's going to happen in most home leagues. This is why rankings are kind of funny and not always the most useful tool. However, I would expect Tyreek Hill to get drafted no later than that, and probably in the 2nd round in most home leagues. because his reputation precedes himself. He's an amazing player. He had 1,799 yards at the age of 30. The problem is last year he had 955 yards and 6 touchdowns in a full season. Now, Tua Tagovailoa was hurt for some of those games, but that's probably not going to change. He's always going to be an injury risk. Also, Tyreek Hill, when the season starts, will be approaching 32 years old. That's really old for a receiver, especially one that relies on speed. Devontae Adams might be able to have another season or two left in him. Tyreek Hill, I think it's more of an open question. Most of the commentary I've seen on Tyreek this offseason is that he had a wrist injury to start last year, and it bothered him for the entire season. And everyone's just kind of settled on that being the explanation for why he had a subpar year. And I'm just not quite convinced. I think that can certainly matter. But is that really the whole reason? Are we really chalking it all up to this one injury that didn't even affect his legs, by the way? And you have to keep in mind, if these guys have ailments, especially in their upper body, they're getting shot up with cortisone or whatever else that'll numb the pain and let them go in there. So a wrist injury, I don't know. I think to speculate that that was the whole reason that he had a down year, I think is pretty dangerous, especially when he played a full season and he's almost 32 years old. This is a player that it's going to be very hard to resist drafting him, that moment where you know that he's starting to drop a little bit in your draft. On the other hand, almost 32 years old, can you get burnt by a player like this? Certainly. And it's hard to look at his totals over the years and believe that he's done, but it can happen quick. I mean, look at Julio Jones. Different style players, I'd say, but overall, the guy just disappeared all of a sudden. He didn't have it anymore. Dez Bryant, who's a bigger player, but another guy that just fell off the face of the earth. So just something to keep in mind. These guys are not immortal, and there's going to come a season where they just can't do it anymore. You have to decide for yourself whether it's this year for Tyreek Hill. Next up, we have DJ Moore from the Chicago Bears, and DJ Moore is in a nice spot, right? They've added a bunch of offensive linemen to shore up that offensive line that had a ton of trouble last year. Caleb Williams has been in the league for a year now, and presumably he has a better coach. And lastly, DJ Moore is the number one target on the Bears. The problem is we don't know if that's true or going to be true throughout the entire season or going forward. He's 28 years old now, which he's still got juice left. I don't think there's any arguments there. 140 targets he drew last year. Only 966 yards and 6 touchdowns, but he's still got the juice at this age. It's just a matter of other things as far as Caleb Williams taking the next step. And most concerning is that DJ Moore is going to start aging out of this offense as early as this year because they have Rome Odunze, who they spent a top 10 pick on. He's coming into his second year. They're expecting big things, as am I, from Rome Odunze. And then they drafted 2 more pass catchers, 10th overall and I believe 34th overall, Colston Loveland and Luther Burden. So these are players that are going to be taking targets away from DJ Moore as they get acclimated into the offense, and that could be sooner than later. So are we spending a pick on a guy that didn't break 1,000 yards last year? His best days are starting to be behind him, and basically there's a new guard being put into place in Chicago. Now, Colston Loveland didn't even attend OTAs because he's recovering from an injury still. Luther Burden, same thing. He had a soft tissue injury that cropped up. These guys missed OTAs, which it seems like that's a big deal for coaches and organizations as far as getting guys up to speed. It's frustrating when they can't be there. In Loveland's case, they knew that before they drafted him. But regardless, these guys are not going to get any real work in until training camp, which is not a far cry from the season starting. So DJ Moore still has the experience and the talent to still be the top dog in this offense, but it's unclear whether that's going to last through 2025 or if we're going to start seeing changes much earlier and some of these younger guys start staking a claim to some targets that DJ Moore would have normally gotten. So those are all things to consider. I don't know if this sea change is going to take place this season. I think it might be another season before some of these other guys start showing that they deserve 20 or 25% target share or something big like that. So for now, I think we might be safe with DJ Moore. But again, things can happen fast, and he's no longer the flavor of the month in Chicago. So it remains to be seen. And the last player on our list is another Dolphin, Jalen Waddle. And I really hesitate to put guys from the same teams on these lists, but I mean, if the shoe fits, right? Tyreek Hill is certainly at a crossroads at his age, and Jalen Waddle as well, who we thought would slowly but surely take over that Tyreek Hill role. It kind of hasn't happened the way that we thought. And this is a guy who, the first 2 years of his career, he was lighting it up. He was good for over 1,000 yards, a bunch of catches, and a suitable number of touchdowns. But 2023, 1,000 yards still and 4 TDs. That's usable, certainly. And then you have 2024, which gets a little worse. He played in 15 games, but only 744 yards and 2 touchdowns. Again, same with Tyreek Hill. Some of that is going to be the Tua factor. They're trying to get better backup quarterbacks in there. One of them is Zach Wilson, but hey, it's got to be better than what they had before. They had guys that I don't even know were second stringers in this league. So they're trying to improve that in case Tua does miss time. As much as everyone makes fun of Zach Wilson, he can make some throws at least and keep your offense on track. He's at least gotten to that point. But overall, Tua has to stay healthy for these guys to hit, and that's not a guarantee. And you see it last year with Waddle. I mean, what a disappointing year. Only getting into the end zone twice in 15 games, well under 1,000 yards, not even close to approaching it. And the issue is they seem to use this player in short yardage, running slants or, drags across the field a lot. Not as many long shots. That seems to be Tyreek's game. But that just means they trust him in those yak situations to get those extra yards. Not that they don't use Hill on those as well. But it's a little bit harder to break one when you got to go through more guys. It's just logic. So that's going to be an uphill battle for Waddle until he runs a slightly more robust route tree. But I'm just concerned about this player mostly because you see he played 15 games last year and 14 the year before and had disappointing seasons. And it's because this is a player that gets dinged up a lot and leaves games or spends a lot of time coming back from injuries where they might be healthy, they might be dressing, you might want to start them in fantasy, but they're not quite ready to rock yet. And I've said this before about T. Higgins, who is a player that I like, but in the middle of your fantasy season, if you've ever owned T. Higgins, you know that 3 or 4 games a year, he's going to leave early or he's going to be coming back from an injury and you're not sure whether you should start him. And you can get screwed by that. Anytime you play a player that you're not sure if they're fully recovered from an injury or if you feel like this is the first week back where they might slowly ease them in, that can be a death knell to your chances of winning that week in fantasy. So that's something I worry about with Jalen Waddle because even though he did play 15 games last year and only had 744 yards, I guarantee you a handful of those games he wasn't fully healthy. But this is the problem, right? Unfortunately, we have to factor these things in when we're talking about drafting players to our fantasy team. Is this someone that's going to be available for me? Because he has a problem with availability or at least staying fully healthy, even if he dresses. Then you have a quarterback who might torpedo this player's season if he can't stay healthy long term. So there's a lot of different question marks here, and we didn't even get into how this player was so amazing for 2 years and so disappointing for the next 2. And there's a lot more than we can cover here as far as why that might be or what's true and what's not as far as the long-term health of Jalen Waddle's fantasy production. But for now, I would tread with caution. The last couple years, he's been a really popular pick, and a lot of people have not backed down this year, even though he's experienced a steep decline. And we see the talent. It's not that he can't get back there. It's just we don't know when or if he's going to have nagging injuries again. It's just really hard to pin down where to take this player. You're going to have to figure out what players am I definitely comfortable taking above this player and below. Like ironclad. I'm talking like you cannot deviate from your list when it's your turn to draft and you're considering Jalen Waddle. If there's any receivers on your list above him that you felt this is more of a risk that's worth taking over Waddle, you need to stick to that list on draft day, in my opinion. Okay, so that was the wide receivers that are at a fantasy crossroads. Which ones are you in on this year? Which ones are you fading? And which ones do you just have to do more research on and think, I've really got to settle on how I feel about this player because I don't want to be sitting there on the clock on draft day and not be sure and make a mistake and just light a pick on fire because I didn't think about it closely enough beforehand. So that's the purpose of this exercise. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Are there any other guys that you think should be on this list? Let me know. Let me know any comments below, and I'll talk to you next time.